Good afternoon and welcome. On behalf of SHRM, we're very glad you're here. I am Tom Kane. I'm a Director of Corporate Partnerships with SHRM. It's my sincere pleasure to introduce Lorne Epstein for the session entitled Uncovering Unconscious Bias. Lorne is an unconscious bias trainer and organizational development professional at Electric Cow, LLC. His 20-plus workshops improve decision-making by reducing bias in the workplace. Since 1993, Lorne has been leading experiential workshops and has been an HR professional since 1996. He is a graduate student in organizational development and is researching solutions to make our world inclusive for everyone. His book, You're Hired: Interview Skills to Get the Job, has been downloaded over 500,000 times worldwide. He is a SHRM SCP certified and a charter member of the Association of Talent Acquisition Professionals. Please, after the session concludes, complete the session survey in the app, and if time allows, we'll be taking questions. If you do have a question, please use the mic so our online attendees can hear you. Please join me in welcoming Lorne.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. Thank you for being here. And my name's Lorne Epstein, and today we are going to have a conversation around unconscious bias. And most of it is going to be you doing exercises. So as you can see up on the screen, the goal of today's workshop, this 1-hour learning lab, is to expand your ability to choose. So every day we're making choices, and those choices come from someplace. And we want to say, hey, how can we expand that? Give yourself more room to make better choices and reduce bias in the workplace. So can I just take a couple of hands? What are you here for? What would you like to learn today? Just one or two. Yes, right here.
Learn my blind spots and what I am being biased against that I may not realize.
Sure, so learn your blind spots and
My unconscious biases.
yeah, and your unconscious biases, absolutely. That's what we'll be doing today. So my view of unconscious bias, so I want you to know, I acknowledge that unconscious bias can harm people. There are biases where people don't like people, and that's real. And we're not going to be kind of talking about those. But I'm very clear that people inflict harm on folks because of their dimensions of diversity. But today we're going to focus on choices that are made unconsciously. So for most of us, which everyone, I can say myself, I have tons of unconscious biases, and I make poor choices, and sometimes those choices harm others. And so we're going to be talking about how can we mitigate that. So today, unconscious bias for this, our definition is unconscious, not being aware, that you're not aware of it. And a bias is a tendency or an inclination. It's not a preference, it's not a choice, it's a tendency or an inclination. And it's a phenomena, unconscious bias is a phenomena, when something from your past is triggered by something from your present, and it comes forward. And it acts like a filter over what's going on right in front of you. And when you have a filter, you can't see what's actually going on in front of you. So we're going to talk about that. Everyone has unconscious bias. I have it. I'll tell you a little story later about one of the biases I had and experienced. So what's some of the impacts of unconscious bias? Well, a group of... Sorry, my slides aren't showing? Oh, can we have the slideshow? I think maybe he asked me what I wanted, and I said, your call. But anyway, we get that up? The one that's there up on the... Okay, that's okay. So there was a study done, and you'll have access to the study later, about 2010, a group of social scientists looked at the fouls called by NBA referees, National Basketball Association referees. And they noticed, and they studied like a 3-year chunk of data, they noticed that referees who had more pigment, darker pigment in their skin, called more fouls on players that had a lighter pigmentation in their skin, and referees that had a lighter pigmentation in their skin called more fouls on players that had a darker pigmentation. So they released this report, and it's going to be available to you. So all the stuff that I'm referring is going to be available to you later. And they released the report in 2010, and the NBA couldn't do anything about it. But 3 years later, they did the study again. And In doing this study, they found that this bias had statistically disappeared. And this is one of the tentpoles of unconscious bias in the work that we do, is that once you become aware of it, and if you think about a referee, their whole career is about being unbiased. They're trained to say, this is how it is, not how I think it is, right? So it's a great example of how becoming aware mitigates your biases. I think the slides are going to come back up in a second. Oh, where does unconscious bias come from? So one place is media. I was born in 1965. There were 3 television stations and a bunch of newspapers. Now there is an infinite amount of media. And media completely has told me what the world is about, right? Another place is family. I was brought up by a single mom in Brooklyn, and that influenced how I see the world and the biases that I have. So what influences your biases? I'll take a couple of sharing. And for those of you who are online, you can write in the chat, what do you think influences your biases? Anybody have an idea of what influences their bias? Yes, right back there.
Previous experiences, like when something happens to you, it shapes how you think about who did that to you or what the surrounding was where it happened to you at.
Absolutely, so a past experience, right? Raise your hand if you have that. Raise your hand if that, yeah, just about everyone's hand is up, right? Absolutely. So why is it a problem? Well, one, it increases your legal exposure at an organization. For those of you who are HR professionals, that's kind of the thing we're trying to do, is mitigate legal exposure. And another is that it inhibits us from seeing what's actually occurring in front of us. Something could actually be going on that's important, you're making a business decision on, but you can't really see it because some bias is occurring. Something from your past is coming forward. And it happens because of our brain, and I'm going to give you like a little bit of brain education about that, and then we're going to do some exercises. Business cases for reducing unconscious bias. Again, this is also in the data that you'll get later. So Harvard Business Review did a study, which was great, and McKinsey & Company did 2 studies over time, which was fantastic. All the data points to organizations that have less unconscious bias have more diversity. And organizations with more diversity have less turnover, more productivity. So it's super great for businesses, right? When you go back to your companies, you can tell your leadership to do something, right? To absolutely do something, because this is going to impact your business. So your amygdala, you have 2. They're like where these lines would meet in the middle of your brain. And what they do, one's a little bit bigger than the other. They're part of this fast decision modeling that you have. It helps you stay alive. If all of us, everyone in this room and online, were out in the forests of the earth 200,000 years ago when humans kind of started to develop, and we saw another group of people on the other side of the lake, we would either run or maybe fight them or hide. We wouldn't have a conversation because we were mostly fear-based. We were trying to survive. Everything we did was about survival. And while we've advanced, our brains have advanced, we still have that part of our brain. Some people call it the reptilian brain or the primal brain, but we still have that. And so what happens is that a memory from your past experience, and that could be a smell, a taste. For example, I was driving in my neighborhood last summer, and I saw a big fast food joint. And there was a huge, like 30-foot banner of their French fries. And as soon as I saw those French fries, the taste of those French fries came to my palate. And I hadn't had them in decades. But it was good, it had a lot of calories, and so in my hippocampus, it was residing. So it pulled it forward, and I had that taste. And I can't even recall it. But that's what the amygdala and the hippocampus work together to make that happen. And particularly with things that are harmful. Anyone ever walking down the street and you see someone that looks familiar? Raise your hand if you've ever seen anyone that looks familiar, ever. Yeah, everyone's hands up, right? So if you had a good experience with that person or a bad experience with that person, that could come forward. Fast thinking is great, right? It's super important. My amygdala and my hippocampus making those quick decisions. I live in the Washington, D.C. area. I can tell you it has saved my life many times driving on the road, and all of a sudden I notice, oh, I moved quickly to the left, or I moved quickly to the right. And I didn't know why in that instant. But less than a heartbeat later, I go, oh, there was a car, or there was a child crossing the street. And I'm like, oh, thank goodness that my brain just did that for me. and it's involuntary, and it's quick, and that's what your amygdala and your hippocampus do. And that's not the only thinking we do. We have another part of our brain that does slow thinking. Mathematics, language, the ability to concentrate, a sense of agency. And that is in what's called the prefrontal cortex, which is in the front part of your brain. It developed a little bit later as humans. Now, what's really interesting is that with your prefrontal cortex, you can make all these great decisions, right? Make great choices. And then you have your hippocampus and your amygdala, which are making all these kind of quick decisions. Be nice to be able to like direct the energy to the one that you want. And I'm going to show you a really quick and easy way to do that at the end of the exercise. How can you get your brain redirected to your prefrontal cortex so you're making those decisions? Now, this is a habit. This is a practice. I think I ran the D&I training online seminar a couple hours ago. And one of the themes was getting everyone on the same page and doing something for a long period of time. So the things that we talk about here are things that you do over a period of time because you're retraining how your brain thinks. Either are good, right? Both are good, depending on what you're doing. So, great, awesome. So we're going to learn how to unpack a bias. So because we're talking about biases, I'm going to go first. I want to be really clear. Oh, man, we can't go back. Oh, well. So the picture, just think, yeah, thank you. Back. Wonderful. All right, so we're going to learn to unpack biases. So someone said, the woman out there said that they happen because of an experience that happened in our past, right? And that impacts you and your decisions. So it would be nice, it'd be really nice to say, well, I have this bias, and I know it's a problem, and maybe you haven't said anything to anybody, but it'd be really nice to unpack it. And in unpacking it and seeing it, like those NBA referees, you can make it disappear. I know. When I get to the line, because I went up to the line, he was right behind me, I'll go slow. That was my way of punishing him. As soon as I had that thought, and this is why I do this work. I mean, for me, this is like the best work I've ever done because it really helps me in how I make decisions. So as soon as I had the thought about harming him, the first thing came to my mind was, how do I know he didn't pick it up? It was like a split second. How do I know he didn't pick it up? I don't know. I don't know. I walked away. And then I asked myself, do I want to judge him? Like, no, I don't want to judge him. I don't want to do that. I don't like doing that. If he was standing in front of me, he would have felt that judgment. Raise your hand if you felt somebody judging you. Yeah. And raise your hand if it feels good. Anybody like it? No. Right? And I don't want to cause that harm. And the next thing I asked myself was, I wonder if he's got a sick kid. And he was getting some medicine. And I thought, maybe he's having a bad day. And it was, I say seconds, but it was probably less than seconds, right? But because I practice, this is a practice. This isn't a binary thing, right? It's a practice. Because I practiced this, in that moment, my brain was like, wait, let me ask some questions about my assumptions. And I was able to shift how I held him in mind. Now I think if I ever see him again, I'd be like, hey, dude, I want you to know I judged you when you did this thing. And I'm really sorry. Is everything okay? So we can all do that, right? And we do this, and I can speak for myself. I judge people, and I made that bias. And I do that. But I can catch myself. And that's the key. So 2 major determinants on making bad choices. Not enough time, not enough information. Right? So think about that scene I just gave you. Not enough time. I only had like milliseconds to judge him. I didn't have enough information. I didn't know what happened afterwards, right? So a lot of the things that we talk about, a lot of the processes that we put in place are designed to create more information and give a little bit more time. So remember I said earlier, you have the hippocampus amygdala thing going on, the keeping you safe. And then you have the prefrontal cortex, which is where you're doing like your mathematics and making good choices. And they both can't be functioning at the same time, which is good. Well, here's one physiological way of slowing up the energy, moving the energy from your hippocampus amygdala to your prefrontal cortex. So you've all heard take deep breaths. Well, it actually works. Physiologically, it works. It actually redirects the energy to the front part of your brain. And I'm going to say, do this when it makes sense to do this. Do this before you're going to interview somebody. Do this before you're going to do a performance review, right? Do this when it's critical, when you know it's a critical moment. And it's a practice. This is a practice. Any questions? But it really works. It absolutely works. Stand-up meetings. So this is another really simple thing. These are low-hanging fruit, right? Everyone here breathes? Raise your hand if you breathe. Okay, raise your hand. Don't raise your hand if you were not going to ever raise your hand. Thank you, thank you, thank you. In the back, I saw. So stand-up meetings. So there was a team, surgical teams in a hospital in Chicago, and what they started doing was, before they actually dug into the patient, they would take a step back, they'd go around the theater, and they'd say, well, what's your name, what's your job, and what's the surgery? And by doing that, it took minutes, just a couple of minutes, that the efficacy, the outcomes of the surgeries got so much better, right? A little huddle. And there are times when we do this, and there are times we don't, like before an interview. Right? We can do this before an interview, right? And by stand up, I don't mean, not because not everyone can physically stand up, but you just get around. You get around, right? And it's quick. It's not a long, blown up meeting. It's about what's happening right now. So we're going to be interviewing for an accountant, and this is what we need, and is everyone on the same page? Boom. And then you go in. And it seems obvious, but, until you do it, you have problems, right? You have problems with people making poor decisions. It's a really easy way. Easy way. Could be a cultural habit. So some other things, kind of more group stuff. Teach your recruiters and hiring managers to use scorecards. So scorecards are great. You literally have a physical or virtual piece of paper with pre-arranged questions that you all decide these are the questions, and then you have a score from 1 to 5. And you decide, well, what's a 1 answer? What's a 5 answer? Right? So that when I'm sitting there in the interview room, and you don't do the whole interview this way, right? But you have this scoring. If you have 3 or 4 people doing interviews, asking 3 or 4 questions, you get quite a nice score, right? That's very hard to bias. Very hard to bias a score like that. And you decide what these numbers kind of represent in general, and you have a way of interviewing people that's less biased. Make sense? Any questions about that? You can also do this for processes. Any process you do it in the office, or manufacturing, or whatever, you can create a scorecard. Anyone questions on scorecards? Another thing is experiential interviewing. So in the business of sports, the National Football League and all those other sports, they hire people not based on a one-on-one interview, right? How do they hire people? How? Performance? Yeah, performance, right? And what do they look at? They look at past performance. They actually have people looking, scouts and whatever, and they go, how does this person play? They don't sit down and go hey, so, if you were on the football field in the past, describe to me what you would do. They watch, and they have numbers. They actually have numbers, right? They have all these statistics that they use to hire people. And even then they make mistakes. Right? I mean, you don't have to be a sports fan to know that they'll hire an athlete, pay them millions of dollars, and it doesn't quite work out. Well, you can do experiential interviewing for any job. Any job. You can find something that someone does and have them demonstrate it. So I was hiring a bunch of recruiters in India. I'd never been to India before, and I did about 150 Skype interviews for a month. And then I went to India, and I got my down select team, about 15 recruiters, brought them to one city, put them in a room with the other vice presidents, and I had them talk for a little while. 5 minutes they talked. And I said, okay, one at a time, stand up and tell us all what you learned about the other person. So for those of you who know recruiters, they need to listen, they need to be able to communicate, right? So this was a great way of having them demonstrate that. And then we did other things. They wrote job descriptions, et cetera. So you can have people demonstrate something in an interview that they're actually going to be doing. Now the thing I loved about it, it was a surprise for me because it was the first time I did it. They loved it. They loved it because they felt oh, I'm actually going to get to demonstrate what I do. And they felt like they had a better shot at getting the job. I know that was the best part out of it. Take bias out from job descriptions. So I do this workshop. I have a workshop on removing all these things, but removing bias from job descriptions. And it's always funny to me because I get a lot of really sophisticated companies with sophisticated HR professionals, and it does not fail. Every time we look at the job description, they're oh, There's all these things that don't make any sense. So, get your job descriptions cleaned up. So you want to increase not only your ability to hire right, but your branding, right? How people see you, because that's usually the first experience somebody has of your company. Are there words in there that make somebody feel uncomfortable because of whatever, right? That shouldn't be in there. Any questions on that?
Yes.
Yeah?
Please give an example of a bias in a job description. Hidden bias.
The words like competitive, or we work hard, we play hard, like the word like Jedi, or I'm sorry, but words that are, so globally speaking, adjectives that have nothing to do with the job. Words that have nothing to do with the job. A degree that has nothing to do with the job. Like if they don't need a degree, why are you asking for a degree? So there's like those kinds of things. Like if you looked at the job and then you looked at the job description, like do they meet? Are they equal? Often they're not. 2 to 4 years experience. Why? Why is there 2 to 4 years and 6 to 8? I mean, I know why. In my experience, it's because they don't want to pay a certain amount. That's my experience. But you have job descriptions, and you've got to decide, like, what do you really need someone to do? And and particularly now, like the talent pool is like, there's, over the next few years, the top 2/3 economies in the world, right? The countries with the top 2/3 economies are going to be negative 90 million workers. And the bottom third economy is going to have a plus of 90 million workers. So there's a delta, there's a huge delta, right? We know for years before COVID, the Bureau of Labor Statistics said that there are more jobs than people. So this is pre-COVID, right? So this work, and the work that you do, because you're going to go back, you've had a couple of days of training, this work rests in these, what I call these 5 pillars, right? So the work that we are doing today is around languaging and awareness. But you've probably done some work on values and norms, and around organizational processes, and talent acquisition lifecycle. We talked about that a little bit today. And metrics and feedback loops. Really important to have a metric, a single metric that you measure when you're doing this, when you're trying to change. And all of it rests on trust, right? All of it rests on trust. And if you, I like to really work with people and like have you all talk, and I'm going to say something that's advice-y. So I'm bracketing this is advice-y. So Uncle Lorne's advice. The worst thing you can do is not be authentic in your actions, right? The worst thing you can do is say we're going to do something and do something that's not in alignment with what everyone's feeling. To say we're going to change, but then not change. You're better off not doing anything. So whatever you do, have it meet what's real in your organization. And that is going to take you a lot further than anything else. So if like, well, we want to do this big thing, but well, maybe, get the little thing and get everyone behind the little thing. One of the things that we were talking about in the D&I training session earlier was the theme was step 0. And all these groups, there was about 50 people, and they broke into small groups virtually, and they came back, and like, what was the theme of like, what's the first thing you should do? It's all getting everyone on the same page, explaining what DE&I means, having your own languaging, creating your own norms, step 0, right? What are we doing here? And have that be something that's agreed upon. It should not be top down, it should be agreed upon. There's not really room to make mistakes here. Anyone agree with that? That there's not room to make mistakes here? No, there's room to make mistakes?
Yes, there's room. Yes.
Oh, tell me.
Yes, there is room to make mistakes here.
Come on up. Let's talk about it. I like it when somebody disagrees with me. Otherwise, I'm just like talking to myself. Come on up.
There's a mic right here, girl.
They're pretty loud.
Oh, okay. The mic is good for the people who are online.
Yes.
Okay, so tell me what you think is wrong with what I said.
I think being in this field, we have to be prepared to make mistakes and know that we're not going to always get it right. That's why we're here. And I think that's part of getting people to buy into, letting them know it is okay to make mistakes, because when you tell them it's not room to make mistakes, it's off-putting to a lot of people.
Love it. That's great. Give her a round of applause, right? So not saying that that would be a mistake, right? So you got to let people know, like, it's okay to make mistakes. You got to create that space for people, right? So a couple of last tips, and we did really good on time. So most important things for me, and again, the biggest tentpole of this workshop is that the more that we talk about and accept our own unconscious bias, everyone has it, the more that this unconscious becomes conscious, right? And when it's conscious, we can play with it. And I can tell you stories about the guy that I judged, right? And how I kind of made it right in my brain, right? And so that, to me, is where we can start taking baby steps towards next. And question the first impressions you have when it's important, when it's something that's important, right? A lot of these things, like, you're going to be driving and it's not going to matter, or you'll be thinking about something, it's not going to matter. But when it matters, when it really matters, right, to be thinking about this, about that first impression that you had, where did it come from? Right? Because that first impression often comes from something that happened in the past. So I did this study this past year. I interviewed 15 CEOs. That's a qualitative report. I literally just got this thing like it's coming out the door this week. So if you'd like it, you can scan the QR code or go to the website and get it for free. We have some time, so I'll take any questions. If anyone has a question online, we haven't heard from anybody online. So Tom, anybody online want to say something? Got it. Anyone here in the audience want to say something? Share, or a question, or a comment? Say something I didn't get right? I can't hear you.
Can you put the QR code back up?
Yes, please.
Oh. Thanks. Oh, I brought a couple of copies of my book to give out to folks who... They're going to be selling these later. I'm probably going to get out of camera, piss off the camera guys. Sorry about that. So you were great. I think your answer was just amazing. That was really, really good. So thank you. Anyone else have any comments or questions, anything they wanted to say? Yeah.
More so a comment regarding the question earlier about biases in job descriptions. I think one of the things that came to mind.
Can you use the mic? That'd be great, just because the folks online, they can hear.
A comment about the question earlier about biases in job descriptions. One of the things that came to mind for me, I just joined an organization as a first HR person, and I was looking at the job descriptions, and one of the things that was on there is ability to stand, pull, and other things that didn't necessarily have anything to do with the specific job. And just thinking about like all of the different like able individuals and those type of things.
Yeah, right. That's absolutely common. And the way different people read job descriptions, right? That certain people read a job description and have one experience, and some people read a job description and have a totally different experience. So you want to make sure that it's clear and it really kind of resonates with what the job requires the person to do or accomplish, right? What do they need to do? Yes?
Okay, I have a question for like doing the scorecard for interviews.
Yeah.
So we previously, prior to me coming to this organization, did the actual scorecards. But what they found that happened is, of course, they weren't choosing the candidates that had the highest score. And so they eliminated the scorecards, and they're very hesitant to go back to doing the scorecards. Do you have any advice on, I guess, getting buy-in for scoring candidates again and actually sticking to who is the highest scored candidate?
Sure, yeah. So two things. One, I would do a retrospective and see why it didn't work. Like, why didn't we use the scorecards? That would be telling, right? And kind of flesh that out. And two, that the scorecards are helpful. They shouldn't be the only determinant, right? But there should be something that's defendable, right? I mean, if you're constantly hiring the person that gets the lowest score, then there's a problem with the scorecard. So maybe there was a problem with the scorecard. Maybe people just ignored it because they still wanted to be biased towards whoever they were hiring. But it's very telling, right? When those things don't line up, it's very telling that something's not quite.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. Can you use the microphone?
So I was just wondering, along with was Misha. Misha's question about the scorecards. Like, what kind of things would you put on a scorecard?
Yeah, okay, so let's think of a baker, right? So a baker, someone who bakes bread, right? So the first thing I'd ask them is about yeast. I'd say, well, tell me about yeast. And there's maybe like 5 good answers, right? Or 5 kinds of answers. One is, you know, I know all of the European yeasts, and I know exactly, I make my own yeast. That would get a 5, right? A 1 would be like, well, I just open up the package and dump it in. Right? So there's like does that make sense? Yeah. And you might want to say, well, bake me these things, or how would you bake this? You know, or what do you do if you don't have yeast? So like those are questions you can ask that someone's answer, you can score it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So raise your hand if you learned something in this workshop. Oh, that's good. That's good feedback. So everyone's got their hand up, except for you. So I'm going to be doing, I have like 2 more minutes left, so I'm not going to give it up. But I'll be over in the bookstore after this. If you have questions or if you want to connect, happy to chat more. I'm here, obviously, till tomorrow. I love this stuff. I absolutely love this stuff. So I started doing adult experiential workshops like 30 years ago and leading them and developing them. And this is absolutely my calling. This is what I'm here to do. And I've done it a ton for free, but now it's my living. And so if you have, if you want to chat on the phone or email or like pick my brain, I love to have those conversations with people. How we can, because my vision is that if we can make the world a bit more aware, we can make it a bit safer and a bit better for everyone, right? And I know that we've done that. There has been things that have occurred in our time, on this planet. 6 years ago, the Supreme Court made a big decision about people who wanted to get married who had the same birth genders, right? And for a long time, that wasn't possible. But then that changed. And there's lots of things like that happen. And so we have to hold these things. And I want to acknowledge all of you as like partners with me, that you're here and doing this. I just want you to know, I get probably a lot of you, it picked you, and you didn't pick it. And it's a calling, and it's a purpose. And I appreciate that, and I appreciate the work that you do. And when you go out there, I think the most important thing to know is you're not alone. You're not alone. There's thousands and thousands of professionals who are doing all sorts of work on this, and lots of great books to read, and lots of great workshops to be on, to engage with. So I also want to thank SHRM. I am a SHRM member. I've been a member for a long time, and this has just been a wonderful experience. I've been speaking at chapters. I probably spoke to over 100 chapters in the last 20 months and a bunch of state. And so for me, this is a great honor to support you as professionals. And so with that, I'm going to be exactly on time. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you.